The first time anyone noticed him, he was a silhouette against the haze of heat rising from the asphalt. A German shepherd, once proud and noble, sat motionless in the middle of the road that cut through the edge of town. His coat, matted and dulled by neglect, caught the last rays of the sun like burnt copper. Every car that approached slowed as if struck by the sight, then swerved wide, the drivers glancing into their mirrors with heavy hearts. But he never moved. He didn't chase, didn't bark, didn't even look afraid. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, his ribs sharp against his skin, eyes searching the horizon as if waiting for something that never came. The air smelled of hot tar and dry weeds. In the evenings, crickets filled the silence, their rhythm like a ticking clock counting down time he did not have. Locals whispered at the diner, passing along sightings like ghost stories. "He's still there," they would say. 3 days now. Some admitted they'd tried to coax him with scraps of food. One man tossed half a burger from his truck window, but the shepherd only sniffed and lowered his head again, letting the flies take it. A woman slowed to call animal control, but no one came. The dog was not aggressive, they said, not bleeding, not worth the rush. By the third evening, his body swayed when he stood. Hunger hollowed him, and the rough heat of the day had given way to the kind of desert cold that bites through bone. Yet still he didn't move. His loyalty, whether to an owner who left him there or to the ghost of a memory, was stronger than his pain. It was then that a rusted sedan rolled to a stop on the shoulder. The driver was a man in his 30s, his face worn from long shifts at a nearby factory. He hadn't planned on stopping. He had seen the shepherd before, always from a distance, always convincing himself that surely someone else would take care of it. But tonight, something in the stillness of the dog's figure unsettled him. The animal looked less like a stray and more like a gravestone, an emblem of loss planted in the middle of the road. The driver cut his engine. The silence was sudden, oppressive. He could hear the faint rasp of the dog's breathing even from a few yards away. Slowly he opened the car door, the hinge squealing in protest. Gravel crunched beneath his boots as he stepped out, the evening air cooling his skin. He could taste the dust in his mouth, dry and metallic. The shepherd's head lifted. His ears twitched, one torn at the tip, his eyes glinting amber in the low light. For a moment their gazes locked, and the man felt the weight of it in his chest. These weren't the eyes of a wild stray. They were eyes that had once known a home, once trusted humans, and had been shattered by that trust. "Hey, buddy," the man said softly, his voice catching in his throat. He wasn't sure why he whispered, only that anything louder might break the fragile thread holding the moment together. The shepherd gave no answer, only shifted slightly, his paws scraping against the cracked pavement. He didn't bare his teeth, he didn't run, he just watched, body trembling with exhaustion. The man crouched slowly, lowering himself to appear smaller, less threatening. He stretched out a hand, palm up, the way he had seen others do with frightened animals. His heart pounded hard against his ribs. One wrong move, and the dog could bolt into the brush, vanish, or collapse where he stood. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he murmured. The wind carried the scent of sage and engine oil, filling the space between them. Minutes passed. Cars went by, headlights flashing briefly across the shepherd's gaunt frame. Each time the man worried the dog might lunge, startled, but he remained frozen, as if carved out of the night itself. Finally, the shepherd took a breath so deep it rattled in his chest. His body swayed. He lowered his head again, as though the weight of the world pressed down on his neck.
And then he made the smallest move, the twitch of his paw dragging an inch closer to the man's hand. It wasn't trust, not yet. It was something closer to surrender. The man reached into his pocket with his free hand, pulling out half a sandwich wrapped in paper. He peeled it back, the smell of bread and roast beef mixing with the dust of the evening air. The shepherd's nose twitched. Hunger battled pride, instinct battling the memory of betrayal. He let out a low, broken whine that cut straight through the man's chest. "It's yours," the man whispered, placing the sandwich gently on the ground. He pushed it forward, then pulled his hand back, giving space. The shepherd didn't leap. He didn't devour. Instead, he leaned down slowly, every muscle stiff with suspicion. He sniffed once, twice, then finally, with a trembling jaw, took a bite. The sound of chewing was so fragile, so hesitant. It felt like a prayer whispered into the dark. The man exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. In that sound, the faint crunch of bread between weak teeth was the first crack in the wall between them. Still, he knew this was only the beginning. The shepherd might collapse before he could be helped. He might lash out when touched. The night was growing colder, and every star that blinked awake above them felt like another second lost. As the shepherd licked the last crumbs from the ground, his body gave a violent shudder. His legs buckled, and he staggered sideways, catching himself just before hitting the pavement. The man shot forward instinctively, arms half extended, but froze. Would the dog bite if he touched him now? Would fear destroy the fragile bridge they had built in minutes? The shepherd's eyes lifted once more, dazed, glassy, but still burning with that same quiet plea. And in them, the man saw a question that demanded an answer. Would he walk away like all the others, or would he stay? The night held its breath, waiting.
The shepherd wavered where he stood, legs trembling like thin branches in the wind. His paws scraped against the asphalt, the sound sharp and brittle. Then his chest hit the road with a thud that echoed in the man's ears. For a second, the shepherd didn't move at all. The man's breath caught, his pulse hammering. He rushed forward, gravel crunching under his boots, the cold of the night wrapping around his shoulders like chains. "Easy, easy," he whispered, kneeling just beside the dog. The shepherd's head jerked weakly, teeth flashing once in warning, but his growl was broken, barely a whisper of what it once must have been. He tried to lift himself, but his limbs folded again, too weak to hold his weight. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, the sound like paper tearing. The man hesitated. If he tried to touch him, the shepherd could bite in panic, snapping with the last of his strength. But if he did nothing, the animal might not last the night. His eyes darted to the car, then back to the shepherd. The road stretched empty around them, silent, indifferent. No one else was coming. He unzipped his jacket slowly, murmuring low words, nonsense really, just syllables meant to soften the silence. With careful hands, he laid the jacket across the shepherd's back. The dog flinched, a pitiful sound leaving his throat, but he didn't bite. His body was so thin, the man could feel each ridge of bone beneath the fabric. "Come on, buddy, we're going to get you out of here." It was a gamble, but there was no time left. The man slid one arm under the shepherd's chest, the other beneath his haunches, lifting gently but firmly. The dog stiffened, lips curling faintly, a warning, but then his body gave way, collapsing into the man's arms like water spilling from a broken vessel. His weight was shockingly light for a dog of his size. The man carried him to the car, heart pounding,
whispering encouragements that were more for himself than the dog. He placed him carefully on the back seat, the jacket tucked around him. The shepherd let out a ragged sigh, his eyes fluttering shut. The drive to the nearest veterinary clinic was a blur of headlights and fear. The man gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched, glancing again and again into the rearview mirror. Each time he expected to see the shepherd still, gone, but each time he saw the faint rise and fall of his ribs, shallow but steady. By the time they arrived, the clinic's fluorescent lights burned against the midnight sky. He pulled into the lot and jumped out, swinging the back door open. "I need help," he called, his voice cracking. Inside, a vet tech rushed out with a stretcher, eyes widening as they saw the shepherd's frail body. Together they lifted him and hurried inside. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the man's lungs, the sharp contrast to the dusty road outside. The shepherd's paws dangled limply over the edge of the stretcher, claws worn and cracked. In the exam room, a veterinary in her 50s pressed her stethoscope to the shepherd's chest. Her brow furrowed immediately. She checked his gums, pale as paper, then his eyes, clouded with exhaustion. "She's severely dehydrated," she said, her voice low, professional, but edged with worry. "I can't promise he'll make it through the night." The man's stomach dropped, his legs threatening to buckle. "But you'll try?" "We'll try everything," the vet replied firmly. She gestured to the tech. "IV fluids now. Start warming blankets. We need to stabilize him." The man stepped back, pressing against the cool wall as the team worked. They slid a catheter into his leg, the dog twitching weakly, but too far gone to resist. Clear liquid flowed into his veins, life in a bag dripping slowly, rhythmically. The vet covered him with heated blankets, her hands brisk but gentle. The shepherd gave a soft whimper, eyes flickering open for a moment. The man leaned closer, whispering, "You're safe now. Stay with us, please." Hours passed in the sterile glow of the clinic. Machines beeped softly, the drip of fluid steady. The man sat in a plastic chair, elbows on his knees, fingers laced tightly as if in prayer. Each time the shepherd shifted, he jolted upright. Each time his breathing stuttered, the man's chest clenched. Near dawn, the vet returned, exhaustion in her eyes, but a faint glimmer of hope. "He's stable for now. His body is fighting, but it's weak. The next 12 hours are critical." The man nodded, unable to speak. He stood, stepping to the edge of the shepherd's blanket. He crouched low, studying the rise and fall of his chest, the twitch of his whiskers in uneasy dreams. Gently, he brushed a finger near his paw, not touching, just close enough for the shepherd to sense his presence. The dog's ear flicked. For a heartbeat, his eyes opened, dull amber shining faintly in the dim light. They met the man's gaze, not with trust yet, but with something else, a fragile acknowledgement that someone was finally there. The man swallowed hard, whispering into the silence, "If you make it through tonight, I swear I won't let you go through this alone again." The shepherd closed his eyes, chest rising once more, and the long night stretched ahead, each hour heavy with the weight of waiting.
The shepherd survived the night. When the man returned to the clinic the next morning, the world outside was painted in gray dawn, the air cool and damp with dew. Inside, the hum of machines and the sterile glow of fluorescent lights pressed down on him. His heart tightened as he walked toward the kennel where the shepherd lay. The dog was alive, but just barely. His ribs still rose in shallow breaths, his body swaddled in thin blankets, an IV line running into his leg. Yet there was something different now. His eyes were open, not glassy with fading strength, but sharp, flickering,
aware. They tracked the man's every movement. "Morning, buddy," the man whispered. He crouched low, careful not to step too close. "You did it. You made it through." The shepherd did not wag his tail. He did not soften. Instead, his lips curled faintly, showing the yellow of worn teeth. A growl rumbled in his throat, low, weak, but clear. The man froze. The sound wasn't anger. It was fear, sharpened into defense. The shepherd was telling him, in the only language he could, that trust was still a chasm between them. The vet approached, her voice quiet but steady. "It's normal. Dogs like him, abandoned, sometimes abused, they hold on to the past. He'll need time and patience, a lot of it." The man nodded, though its weight sank deep into him. Time, patience, neither of those guaranteed success. Later that day, when the IV was removed and the shepherd was stable enough to be discharged, the man signed the papers and carried him to the car again. The shepherd resisted weakly, paws bracing against the crate door, but he had no strength to fight. The man whispered soothing words as he drove, the road stretching long and quiet beneath the pale sky. At home, he had prepared a corner of the garage with blankets, a water bowl, and food. The air smelled faintly of oil and cedar, a place not meant for comfort, but safer than the road. He left the crate open and stepped back, giving the shepherd space. The dog hesitated, eyes sharp, ears twitching. Finally, he limped out, his claws clicking softly against the concrete. He circled once, then collapsed onto the blankets, his body curling tight. Days passed like this, silent, tense, fragile. The man fed him twice a day, placing the bowl down and stepping back. At first, the shepherd refused. He would glare, lips twitching, until hunger gnawed too deep, forcing him to eat once the man retreated. Each meal was a battle between instinct and distrust. At night, the man would sit near the doorway, just out of reach, the glow of a small lamp casting soft shadows. He spoke in low tones about nothing in particular, work, the weather, the memory of his father's old dog when he was a boy. He never reached out, never forced touch. He simply let his voice fill the silence, a quiet thread weaving familiarity into the space. Still, the shepherd's body betrayed his past. When a car backfired outside, he shot up with a yelp, pacing frantically, nails scraping against the concrete. When the man reached for a broom one evening, the shepherd recoiled, ears flat, eyes wide, a flash of pure terror. The man froze, realizing the truth. Someone had raised a hand to this dog before. Each setback struck like a blow. The man would retreat to his kitchen afterward, head in his hands, wondering if he was in over his head. He wanted to give up some nights, to convince himself that the shelter would have better resources, professionals trained for this. But each time he looked back at the garage, saw those amber eyes watching him through the half-dark, he knew he couldn't. Something in the dog's stillness spoke louder than words. He had waited in that road for someone, maybe for him. The breakthrough came one evening in the smallest of ways. The man had left a piece of chicken on the ground, softer than kibble, the scent drifting warm in the air. He sat on the step by the door, pretending not to notice, reading from a battered book just to give his voice something steady to carry. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Finally, the shepherd rose. His movements were slow, cautious, every muscle tense. He crept forward, sniffing, paws silent on the concrete. The man held his breath, keeping his eyes on the book. He didn't look directly, didn't move. And then, so quietly it could have been missed, the shepherd lowered his head and took the piece of chicken from the floor. He ate, slowly, carefully, his ears still trained on the man. When it was gone, the shepherd looked up. Their eyes met across the few feet of space, and for the first time, the growl did not come. There was no wag of the tail, no softening, but there was a pause, a question in his gaze, one that wasn't entirely rejection. The man's throat tightened. He whispered, "Good boy." The shepherd blinked once, then retreated back to his blanket, curling once more. But something had shifted, like a crack in a wall letting light seep through. That night, the man lay awake in his bed, the sound of the wind brushing the house. He thought of the dog's eyes, the way they had held his gaze without anger for the first time. He thought of the road, of the way the shepherd had refused to move until someone stopped, and he realized this was not just a dog waiting for food or for rescue. This was a soul waiting to believe again. But belief was fragile, and fragile things could break. Tomorrow would bring more tests. Tomorrow, the past could rear up again. Still he clung to that tiny miracle, the single moment the shepherd had chosen not to turn away. The question now lingered in the air, sharp and alive. Would that fragile step grow into trust, or would it crumble beneath the shadows of the past?
Healing did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like dawn through a crack in heavy curtains, faint and almost invisible, until suddenly the room was filled with light. Each morning, the man found the shepherd sitting a little straighter, his body less hunched, his eyes less dull. The first time the dog managed to rise without trembling, the man felt a surge of relief so sharp it nearly brought him to tears. His legs were still thin, his muscles wasted from hunger and neglect, but strength was returning in careful degrees. Trust, too, grew in fragile increments. The shepherd no longer barked when the man entered the garage. The growl that once rumbled in his throat softened into wary silence. Some evenings, when hunger gnawed deepest, he would even take food from the man's hand, though his jaws quivered with nerves as he snatched it quickly. Every crumb eaten this way was a small victory, a stitch in the invisible wound between them. But the shadows did not vanish. There were nights when sudden sounds shattered the calm. The slam of a door or a clap of thunder would send the shepherd spinning, pacing in tight circles, panting hard, his claws scratching at the concrete as though searching for escape. The man would crouch low, speaking softly, never reaching out too soon. He learned patience was a language the dog understood. Weeks passed, and the garage was no longer enough. One afternoon, the man clipped a leash onto the shepherd's collar, a slow process, the dog's body tense, ears pinned, every muscle coiled. The first walk outside was halting, full of stops and starts, the shepherd pulling back, then forward, then freezing altogether. But beneath the pale winter sun, the two of them moved, however awkwardly, down the quiet street. Neighbors peeked from windows, whispering of the man who had taken in the broken dog from the road. Progress built like a fragile tower, each day balancing on the hope of the last. Then, just when it seemed the tower might hold, it faltered. It was late one night when the first signs appeared. A storm had rolled in from the hills, rain hammering against the roof, wind whistling through the eaves. The shepherd lay curled on his blanket, but his body was too still. When the man knelt to check, he felt the heat radiating off him, unnatural, burning. He touched the dog's nose. It was dry, cracked, feverish. Panic flared in his chest. "No, no, not now," he whispered, his voice breaking. The shepherd opened his eyes, glazed and heavy, a low whimper leaving his throat. He tried to rise but collapsed immediately, his legs unable to hold him. The man grabbed his phone, calling the emergency vet clinic. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. Bring him in immediately. It could be infection. Time is critical. The rain was relentless, lashing across the windshield as the man sped through the dark. Wipers squealed against the glass, barely keeping pace with the storm. In the back seat, the shepherd lay sprawled, his body trembling, breath shallow. Each glance in the mirror made the man's hands tighten on the wheel. The thought of losing him now, after everything, was unbearable. At the clinic, they rushed him inside. The vet from before met them, her face grave. She examined him quickly, running practiced hands along his body. She said, "His immune system is still fragile. A fever like this could overwhelm him. We'll need antibiotics, fluids. Keep him under close watch tonight." The man stood in the corner, drenched from the storm, his clothes heavy with rain. He watched as they inserted another IV, the shepherd twitching weakly, then lying still. Machines beeped, monitors flashing in the sterile room. The man pressed his fist against his lips, forcing back the rising tide of helplessness. "Will he make it?" he asked, finally, his voice raw. The vet paused before answering. "He's a fighter, but it's up to him now. All we can do is support his body and hope he pushes through." The hours crawled, the storm outside raging as though mirroring the battle inside the shepherd's body. The man sat by the kennel, his chair pulled close, his hand resting against the bars. He whispered again and again, not knowing if the dog could hear. "Don't give up. You've come too far. Please don't give up." Once, in the middle of the night, the shepherd stirred. His head lifted weakly, his eyes half open. For a fleeting moment, his muzzle pressed against the man's fingers through the bars. The touch was faint, almost accidental, but it was there, a spark in the darkness. By dawn, the fever broke. The vet entered, a faint smile tugging at her weary face. "He's stabilizing. He made it through the worst." The man let out a shuddering breath, relief flooding him like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against the bars of the kennel. "Good boy," he whispered, voice trembling. "You did it." When the shepherd's eyes met his, they were no longer only guarded. They were tired, yes, but also softened, as though some silent acknowledgment had passed between them. Perhaps it was not yet trust, but it was something close. A fragile recognition that the man had stayed when others might have walked away. And in that moment, beneath the lingering rumble of the storm, a new truth settled between them. Survival was no longer enough. What lay ahead was something harder, more fragile, and infinitely more important. The long road back to living, to belonging.